Coming up on today's Philadelphia Eagles Now, Eagles offensive coordinator Brian Johnson fired by Nick Sirianni. Also with that, we're going to take a look at the top Brian Johnson replacements to try to get Jalen Hurts and this offense back on track. It's all coming up right now. This is Philadelphia Eagles Now by Chat Sports. I'm Chase Sr. Appreciate all of you for being here with us. We also want to send a thank you to our brand new sponsor, 8 Sleep, for making today's show possible. 8sleep.com/chatsports, $200 off their pod cover so that you can get a better sleep every single night. More information on that coming up here in just a little while. So Nick Sirianni continues to make huge changes to this Eagles coaching staff. He already fired defensive coordinator Sean Desai. Matt Patricia not going to have his contract renewed. And now offensive coordinator Brian Johnson has been let go. We talked about this report from Eagles insider Derek Gunn on yesterday's show, and he tweeted this out. All indications are that Brian Johnson will not be returning as the Eagles offensive coordinator. He will land elsewhere in some offensive capacity. And then Jeff McClain of the Philadelphia Inquirer, who's always on it on the beat, confirmed that report, saying Brian Johnson not returning to the Eagles as OC, confirming Derek Gunn's previous report. Nick Sirianni will have to replace both his OC and his DC. Colts offensive coordinator Jim Bob Cooter was mentioned as a possibility, but he won't be among the top candidates, I am being told. And then Ian Rappaport on the national front that Nick Sirianni has let go of his defensive coordinator Sean Desai, who lost his play calling duties late in the year, and that news breaking on January 21st. So what is happening here? Obviously, it's become clear that Sirianni is remaking his coaching staff, and I imagine that in his end-of-the-season meetings with Howie Roseman as well as owner Jeffrey Lurie, they wanted him to make the necessary changes on the staff because this team became unglued and they were disjointed on both sides of the football at the end of the year, and that's partially why Philadelphia lost 7 of 8. The coaching was not good enough. The players were not good enough, and then the execution was bad as well. And the impact of all of this, the Eagles are going to have 2 new coordinators for the second year in a row. Now, I thought it was important to bring back Nick Sirianni to have continuity at head coach. You do not have that continuity at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. So for the second consecutive year, the schemes might be similar or the same, but the nuances from these new coaches coming in are going to cause some changes to be made, and adjustments from the player's standpoint will have to be made as well. And the Eagles, moving on from a coach who they internally loved, Brian Johnson started off as the quarterback's coach after Sirianni hired him in 2021. He was the quarterback's coach at Florida, where he worked, and the offensive coordinator with Kyle Trask. Did great work with Dak Prescott at Mississippi State. He was the youngest play caller and offensive coordinator in college football when he was at Utah, where he starred. And the Eagles made the seamless transition to move on from Shane Steichen, continue with that aforementioned continuity, and the move made a lot of sense to just promote Brian Johnson. But it just simply wasn't good enough this year. And did Jalen Hurts play a role in all of this? It is a fair question to ask. Hurts has known Johnson since he was 4 years old because Hurts' dad coached Johnson in high school. And it's hard to imagine, right, that a $255 million quarterback did not have some input in this decision. And if the Eagles didn't consult with him, I don't agree with that process. I think they did. And the question now becomes, will a new offensive coordinator bring fresh ideas and creative, modern concepts to the table, to this Eagles offense, or work inside the confines of Sirianni's system? This is why I think Brian Johnson was fired at the end of the day, and I do think that offensive changes need to be made. Offensive production plummeted from last year. The play of Jalen Hurts fell off a cliff, especially late in the year. There was a lack of creative play calling, no answers for the blitz, and play calling is an art. And I thought that Brian Johnson was bad situationally, and I thought that Brian Johnson didn't stick with the run enough, and I think that he tried to diversify the approach and not target A.J. Brown enough, and everything seemed hard. Everything seemed clunky, and you look at this Eagles offense over the last 2 years, the raw numbers this year weren't bad. 7th in points per game, 7th in total points, 8th in yards per game, 12th in yards per play, 8th in rushing yards per game, but all of those numbers certainly down and decreased from last year's record-setting Eagles offensive output when they were third in the NFL in points per game, second in points, second in yards per game, sixth in yards per game, fifth in rushing yards per game, and there is a noticeable drop-off between the stats to the left and the numbers to the right. And again, the eye test tells you that something was just missing from this Eagles offense, and they certainly missed the play calling, the play designing, and just the overall game planning and execution from Shane Steichen. And going from Shane Steichen to Brian Johnson, there was a clear gap between the play calling abilities between those two offensive minds. So with that, today's poll question is this. This will also be the pinned comment on today's video. Do you agree with the decision to fire Brian Johnson? Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Let me know. I understand it's Nick Sirianni's offense, right? But the play calling, it was just very, very clunky. Coming up next here on the show, we are going to run through a handful of Brian Johnson replacements, offensive coordinators who I think can help get Jalen Hurts back to playing at an elite level, and this is a desirable job. You have Hurts, who's a dual threat quarterback. You have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and this offensive line, who's going to get the job? My best guess is coming up here in just a moment. But first, today's Eagles Now is brought to you by 8 Sleep, the high-tech solution to your age-old sleeping issues. 8 Sleep's Pod 3 cover slips right over your mattress, bringing heating and cooling tech that keeps you comfortable and sleeping deeper for a better, more restful night. For me, I like to sleep cold. Helps my recovery the next day. You can try it out for yourself. Go to 8sleep.com/chatsports. Get $200 off plus free shipping on the pod cover by 8 Sleep. Start the new year right and invest in the rest that you deserve with the 8 Sleep pod. You know how important sleep is to me. We're grinding year round to provide you with the best daily Eagles coverage. I also really care about my health, wellness, and fitness, and sleep is at the backbone of all of my success. My new running streak approaching 300 days, little meditation before sleep. I use the 8 Sleep pod cover. I feel amazing and rested the next day so that I'm able to really put out so much content here at Chat Sports. The pod cover will improve your sleep by automatically adjusting your bed's temperature based on your individual needs. And as we're showing you, you can control this with your phone. The cover can be added to any bed like a fitted sheet, and it allows you and your partner to cool or warm your side of the bed as low as 55 degrees and up to 110 degrees. There's no better way to improve your day-to-day life better than sleep, and the easiest way to do that is with 8 Sleep's Pod 3. Start the new year right here in 2024 and invest in the rest that you deserve with the 8 Sleep Pod. One more time. It is 8sleep.com/chatsports. 8sleep.com/chatsports. You can control everything with your phone. $200 off plus free shipping on the pod cover by 8 Sleep. Link is down below in the show notes as well as in the comment section of this video. Next up, let's take a look at some Brian Johnson replacements to take over for him as the next Eagles offensive coordinator under Nick Sirianni here in 2024. My number one candidate, I'm going to the college ranks, to a guy who is the Texas State head coach in G.J. Kinne, but also a former Eagles practice squad quarterback. G.J. Kinne is a great, young, creative, innovative offensive mind who's put up some staggering offensive numbers as a head coach so far early in his career after his playing days were over. Decided to get into coaching, and he's had a lot of success so far. At Texas State, before he was hired, Texas State averaging 21 points per game, 325 yards per game, and then after he was hired this year, 36 points per 457 yards per game, a lot of pre-snap motion, modern-day offensive concepts. And the Eagles offense this year looked archaic. It looked high school level. But before Texas State, G.J. Kinne was at Incarnate Word. And in 2021, before his arrival, 39 points per game, 513 yards per game, and then after him, 51 points per 721 yards per game. We talked about G.J. Kinne a couple of times here on the show, and some of you say, those offensive numbers aren't going to translate to the NFL. Why would you go to the college ranks? Here's the thought process here. You want a young, innovative, creative offensive mind who knows the nuances and the modern trends of what today's football is all about. G.J. Kinne knows that, has experience playing at the NFL level. And then there's this. He's not ready to be a head coach after this year. So you can have him for the next 2 to 3 years and not have to go back through this cycle once again. Brian Johnson replacement number 2, Zac Robinson, the Rams quarterbacks coach, and also the passing game coordinator under head coach Sean McVay. And you're going to notice a trend here with a lot of these candidates. They're young, up-and-coming, creative, influential offensive minds who are going to bring fresh perspectives to this Eagles offense. Zac Robinson, hired by McVay in 2019. He's been a quarterbacks coach for the Rams, wide receivers coach, pass game coordinator. We've seen Matthew Stafford play really well. We saw Baker Mayfield last year play pretty well. Carson Wentz looked pretty damn good in Week 18 as well. Cool story for Zac Robinson. Used to scout quarterbacks for Pro Football Focus, so he has a background in quarterback development here. Only 37 years old. Has had offensive coordinator interviews this offseason, so he's a hot commodity on the open market. At number 3, it's Frank Reich, former Panthers head coach, former Colts head coach, and of course was the Eagles offensive coordinator under Doug Peterson when the Birds won the Super Bowl in 2017. Did great work with Carson Wentz and his development, and then Nick Foles making adjustments en route to bringing home the only Lombardi trophy that this great city has ever seen. I actually would not hire Frank Reich as offensive coordinator, but he's going to be named and talked about as a replacement. Here's why I would not bring in Frank Reich. Him and Nick Sirianni are too close, and I think they share the same offensive philosophy. And for Sirianni, he needs to change and adjust this offense. They were way too predictable, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Lack of play action. Frank Reich, year by year, this year, play action, 31st in the NFL with Carolina. Last year with Indianapolis, 23rd. And then in 2021, 2020, the Eagles were ranking 4th and 27th. Motion by year, 2023, Frank Reich, Carolina, 28th, 2022, 25th. Eagles, 2021, 2020, 15th and 27th. Under center by year, I want to see Jalen Hurts under center more. I want to see more play action, especially throws out of play action. Frank Reich's rankings here as the offensive play caller for the Colts and for the Panthers. Simply not good enough. Now, would I bring Frank Reich on the staff? Yeah, I would. As a quarterbacks coach, I think he would be great for a voice in the ear of Jalen Hurts. As an offensive consultant, as a guy who's played in this league, coached as a coordinator, quarterbacks coach, and as a head coach, those things are really valuable. As a guy who Nick Sirianni, young coach, can bounce things off of. I like that type of idea, but not as the offensive coordinator. Coming in at number 4, Eric Bieniemy, the Commanders' offensive coordinator. He is still with that organization, even though Washington is going to bring in a new head coach to take over for Ron Rivera. Why Bieniemy? Learned under Andy Reid, as we know. Andy Reid, arguably the best offensive mind in this generation of football, one of the best of all time. Offensive coordinator for Patrick Mahomes in his first 5 years. What have we seen from the Chiefs this year? Their offense has flatlined a little bit. And I think they miss Eric Bieniemy because, I'll tell you what, Matt Nagy, not the same offensive guru that Eric Bieniemy is. Bieniemy this year, the Commanders were an awful football team, but he did make Sam Howell look really solid, and Sam Howell looked pretty damn good against this Eagles defense, but all quarterbacks did. For Bieniemy, he's not going to shy away from the running game, and that's something that Brian Johnson did a little bit too much of, and that's something that Andy Reid still does a little bit too much of. But for Eric Bieniemy, he understands the importance of the run game because he used to be a running back in this league. And I think that this is somewhat important. I think you need to bring in an offensive coordinator who's not afraid to get after Jalen Hurts, who's not afraid to criticize him. Brian Johnson's not going to do that because he's known Hurts since he was 4. Probably looks at Hurts as like a family member or a son. But Hurts needs to make improvements. Hurts needs to be better. Hurts needs to get more fired up at times. He can't always be a flatliner and cool, calm, and collected, although those are important qualities. And with Bieniemy, he got after Patrick Mahomes, and sometimes that brings the best out of players. I think he can do the same with Jalen Hurts. Now let's go to Klint Kubiak, who is currently the San Francisco 49ers pass game coordinator. Now, Sean McVay, a Kyle Shanahan disciple, Klint Kubiak is working under Shanahan's staff right now. He's helped develop Brock Purdy, where Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, final pick in the draft 2 years ago, top 5, top 10 in basically every major statistical category, number 1 completion percentage on long balls. He's maximized his teammates, where the Niners, the first team in NFL history to have a tight end, 2 wide receivers, and a running back, have more than 1,000 all-purpose yards. George Kittle, first 1,000-yard season since 2019. Christian McCaffrey, more than 2,000 all-purpose yards. Brandon Ayuk had a career season. And Brock Purdy has helped elevate them. And Klint Kubiak, as well as Brian Griese, they've helped Brock in addition to Kyle Shanahan. Why I also like Kubiak, he has experience calling plays. When Nathaniel Hackett got fired by the Denver Broncos, it was Kubiak who was calling plays down the stretch. I thought he did a pretty good job. He was the Broncos quarterbacks coach that year, pass game coordinator, and then also the Vikings offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach as well. I'm always intrigued by Kyle Shanahan's offense, Sean McVay's offense, Matt LaFleur's offense, Mike McDaniel's offense, because those are the modern-day concepts that I'm talking about here, and Kubiak can bring that to the table, again, as a young, innovative offensive mind. Kliff Kingsbury is still young. I know he flamed out with the Arizona Cardinals this past year under Lincoln Riley. He was the USC quarterbacks coach. Somewhat concerning that Caleb Williams kind of regressed this year as compared to last year. I think that's more on Lincoln Riley and that awful defense for USC. What Kingsbury would bring, he is a Mike Leach disciple with a little bit of an implication of Mike Leach's air raid. 4 wide receiver sets, a lot of vertical routes, which Sirianni, Brian Johnson became obsessed with, and they overdid it this year. He's going to add a little RPO to the table as well, because he coached Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, both very mobile, and he did coach Patrick Mahomes as well. The worry here is that Kingsbury would be too reliant on the air raid. I'm not sure how consistent that offense can be. He was in the running for that Bears offensive coordinator job, didn't get it. It went to Shane Waldron, former Seahawks offensive coordinator, who's also a Sean McVay disciple. And the worry with Kingsbury as well, he's not going to run the football enough. Jerrod Johnson is a sneaky name to keep an eye on here. He could get the Saints OC job. He's in the running for the Browns offensive coordinator job. He is currently the Texans quarterbacks coach. Works a lot with Quincy Avery and C.J. Stroud, with Jerrod Johnson as his quarterbacks coach, had a record-setting rookie season. He led the NFL in touchdown-to-interception ratio as a rookie. He was also the Vikings assistant quarterbacks coach in 2022 under Kevin O'Connell, who had a revolving door at the quarterback position this year, did O'Connell, and they still nearly made the playoffs. Really good offensive mind is O'Connell. And Johnson, he's been able to come under some really good offensive minds and worked alongside Bobby Slowick this year, the Texans play caller and offensive coordinator, who's in the running for some head coaching jobs across the NFL as well. T. Martin, a former player and the Ravens quarterbacks coach, he kind of came up under Greg Roman. So he has familiarity with that RPO that Lamar Jackson and the Ravens ran a lot of. But this year, we've seen Lamar take further strides as a thrower. Better pocket feel, less reliant on his legs. And T. Martin, a very valued voice and coach in NFL offensive coaching circles. Frank Smith is the Dolphins offensive coordinator. Why would he go from Miami to Philadelphia? Well, Mike McDaniel calls the plays for that Dolphins offense, so Frank Smith would have the opportunity to do that with Philadelphia. And then a sneaky name here that wouldn't surprise me because Sirianni's young and he's trying to bring in that young mind. Liam Coen, the Kentucky offensive coordinator, who used to work under Sean McVay 2 years ago, or a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, helped develop Will Levis into a second-round pick. And I covered Penn State football when I was working for WNEP up in northeastern Pennsylvania. Scranton, shout out to the 570, type 570 if you're tuned in from up there. Will Levis at Penn State was strictly a running quarterback. He was a backup to Sean Clifford. He goes to Kentucky, and he plays really, really good football. Liam Coen was a part of that. So that's another name to keep tabs on as well. So right there, that's 10 offensive coordinator replacements for Brian Johnson. Who do you want the Eagles to hire as OC? I hope that this show was informative, and if you haven't subscribed, do so right now for more shows like this.